Hi, Lucky.
Hello.
Were you on vacation last
I
time?
was on vacation last week.
How was your vacation?
It was good. Yeah, it was spring break for the kids. So we went camping.
Where'd you go camping?
Big Sur.
Oh, Big Sur
Big Sur's in
in
California.
California.
I live in San Francisco. So it's
Oh,
about
okay.
3 hours south. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you lived in Seattle.
No,
Okay.
I know it's common. It's like you work for Microsoft, therefore you live in Puget Sound, but no.
Well, lucky you. Um,
Yeah, no, it's lovely. I like it here.
Hi, Brandon.
Hello.
Hello, Brandon.
How's it going for everybody today?
Very well. How are you?
Doing okay, although out of stuff to drink, so I will be right back.
Yes, please hydrate.
I have the ab, is it abuela or abuelita? The chocolate mix.
Yes, yeah,
The
it's
Mexican.
abuelita, yeah, the
Yeah.
Mexican hot chocolate.
Yeah, I have made that with some chai spices, and it tastes just awesome and
Yeah,
feels good on my throat.
that actually sounds like it could be a nice business, selling Mexican hot chocolate with chai spices. It's like, Indo-Mexican fusion well food or comfort drinks.
I'm actually very good at combining Indian and Mexican food. It's they're very similar, so there's
A lot of the same spice spaces, right?
yep.
Yeah.
There's
Rice.
There's definitely a lot of cinnamon, but the Indian side will add a lot of cardamom. So all smells and tastes very good.
Love it. Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm going to add the link to the Hack MD. Please add your names as attendees to the April 5th section. We'll kick it off in a few moments. I see folks drawing in. Would anybody like to volunteer as note taker? I'm happy to chair unless anybody else would like to do it. You want to chair or note take, Jason?
I can note take.
Thank you, Mr. Jason.
Hold that.
What are you enjoying there, Jason, after you finish your mouthful? Cookies? Oh, rough cheddar ruffles. Oh, yeah. Get them off screen now, immediately. My brain's already sending the signals for how they taste. Yeah, they are so good.
This is where the Zoom blur filter helps out a lot.
Yeah.
Censoring it from our view.
Yeah, let me turn that off real quick.
They are very Moorish, those, yes. Yeah, you can't just have half a packet. Mm-mm. Okay. Shall we kick it off? Excellent. Thumbs up all around. Hello. Yes. Hello. Okay. Excellent. Hello and welcome to the OCI Working Group for Reference Types. Today is Tuesday, April 5th. I hope everybody's having a wonderful day. Just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to YouTube and falls under the code of conduct for the OCI. So it basically says, please treat everybody with respect in all that you converse and write down. I would really appreciate it if we all adhere to that. I have posted the HackMD link. I will do it again for those that just joined. Please add your name to the attendees list there. I am Lachlan Evenson. I will chair this meeting today, and we have Jason Hall as the note taker with the gold medal. Thank you very much, Jason. Lovely to see all the faces here today. We've got a packed agenda again. Today we have two items. We have review proposal A and with Sajay, and suggestion for proposal E with Brandon. So to kick us off today, Sajay, I will hand you the proverbial microphone and the little soapbox, put it under your feet. You have proposal A, which you can share with everybody. Thank you, Sajay.
Hey, do folks have links, or do you want me to share the link for proposal A as well?
I'll share a link for you. Sajay, did you want to share your screen as you walk through, or did you want me to share? You got it. Thank you.
I can share.
The piano in the background is quite
I'm
calming.
sorry about that. Maybe.
No, don't be sorry. I enjoy it.
All right, can folks see?
We see. Thank you, Sajay.
Right. I want to thank Steve for submitting this, the whole proposal. So how do you want me to walk through? Should I just go part by part, or do folks have any questions that I can answer up front?
How about you go part by part, and then, we can take questions either throughout if people would like to raise their hand, just to keep a flow there. And Jason's got the notes.
Sounds good. So let's start with one of the key requirements where we considered a different set of options. Like, the primary consideration was to change the OCI manifest itself. There were limitations in how we could kind of like remove requirements for config. And also we just wanted to kind of like start clean to start with. So the proposal in its current state is a representation of what ORAS has done for many extents, but want to look at it for the working type groups and how this kind of aligns with the OCI requirements going forward. So just to start with, the first requirement was to kind of like identify what is being pushed to the registry. Is it an ice cream, or is it a signature, or an SBOM, or any generic artifact? So we wanted to introduce one property which is called the artifact type that kind of like gives an indication. There are debates about whether it should be IANA type registered or whether it should be a free-form string. That's open for debate, and when we kind of like evolve the specification for the proposal. The second part was how we wanted to kind of like stitch together different types of artifacts. So it kind of takes from the concept of layers for the OCI image spec, but the difference is that there is no ordinal requirement for these blobs to exist. Like, layers have to be ordinal in some way, and they kind of compose over the diff IDs and whatnot. But this is an arbitrary set of blobs that can be laid out in some form. So you could involve multiple signatures without any overlay FS or anything like that requires these blobs to be composed. So those were the two key aspects of why we did not want to kind of like choose layers and kind of like keep it as blobs. But there's nothing stopping us from evolving it to just call it layers, but it's not ordinal when maybe a property is specified. That's one of the key aspects of this one. The most important property here that we wanted to discuss was the subject itself. The subject is a pointer to another artifact or another entry, which is a manifest in this case, which is the digest of the manifest with its media type, because as everybody knows, the registry kind of like modifies the digest depending on the media type that you actually query it with, right? So you want to give the full descriptor, and this is very similar to what the other proposals have, which is introduce a reference. And so we could call it reference or subject. The reason why we went with subject, I think, is also an interesting thing, because it's kind of pointing upwards in some way, whereas references kind of point downwards. We could kind of like keep it as a reference or subject. It really doesn't matter. Couple of other considerations maybe was whether you should support one subject and multiple subjects. So for the purpose of time, we can talk about that if folks are interested in, hey, can I have one artifact pointing to multiple images? Like, can I have a bundle signature and things like that? But just to kind of start off with, we considered let's start with one subject. You can create a link file and then kind of like build on that. So the other consideration for subject was, if we ever wanted to keep these properties generic enough and you wanted to expose more ideas, I think this kind of came back from Vincent's feedback, which is, let's assume we want to point to blobs at some point. We don't have to change this from manifest to descriptors or something else. So that's why the name is open enough, but yet it does not kind of like, the specification can still start with just manifest and maybe later evolve. Use a property name that is a little generic. That was the idea. I'm not seeing any up. Brandon, I see your hand.
Yeah, just do that up. You're saying you're going to allow subjects to be a blob in the future, is your thought?
The name is open enough that if we find a use case for supporting blob-like references, we can, but we don't want to probably like open that up right now in the specification. That's kind of like the initial pitch that when we discussed with Vincent whether we want to take this forward. It was initially called manifest, and then we kind of like went through a couple of iterations, and in the current proposal is subject, just to kind of like indicate whether we want to choose names that are possible for future expansion without kind of closing the name itself. That's the only reason.
I'll push back for two reasons. To cut off future people that think about this option, which was, one, you might create the option for looping in that case, because you could potentially point to a blob that you're also pointing to as your child, and you can get to that looping scenario. The other is that you get confusing on the APIs when you see that descriptor there. Do you call the manifest API or the blob API to look it up? And so for both of those, I would recommend not going down that path.
That's kind of why the proposal is only calling out manifest, but we can, again, this is one of the open items, right? Whether when we kind of like form the working group proposal, it might not even be called subject. So we're open to that. Steve, you have your hands raised.
Yeah, I think there was two pieces wrapped in there. There was the subject property and whether it can point to blobs or manifest. And we did land on manifest because it is a thing. Basically, we're trying to point at an object that has a life cycle. Blobs are an implementation of a manifest. So the thing that I think we got is the blobs collection was going to be possibly descriptors so that it could contain other manifests as well as blobs. And that's the one that definitely provided loops. So we backed out of that. There was actually a PR that was in the main repo, and then we back out because we weren't comfortable with implementing that change. So a subject points to a single manifest, not a blob. And the blobs collection is literally blobs that represent the reference type. If it's a signature, it can contain content. If it's an SBOM, it can contain content. And I'm sure we'll get into the area where we don't actually need blobs. It could just be a set of annotations.
Yeah, the looping risk, though, is any time that your subject can point to something that is also one of your child objects from other fields in that same manifest. And so you need to keep those, you need to keep the subject at a higher level than every other descriptor within that manifest.
Completely agree. And that's why it is where it is. Like basically what I'm trying to say is we explored the pendulum swing of various, like what was potential, and we couldn't find a solid use case that warranted the open-ended inability to track that. That was always copying.
Yeah.
Continue.
Go ahead, Sajay.
Right. So that's about the manifest itself. And then this is I would kind of like qualify this as a slightly hairy topic, but it's worth discussing. That's why I wanted to pre-qualify it. We did want to introduce a descriptor with an artifact type in this proposal. The reason is that we want to use this type as a way when you communicate back the list of references to tell you that it's not just an OCI artifact. We wanted to kind of like say that it could be an artifact of a signature type and whatnot. We can move this to an annotation as a part of the working group if we agree that no, we just want to keep the descriptor as is and not introduce a new property as well. Brandon, go ahead.
No, the thumbs up is I was going to ask if we could move this to an annotation. I think it makes a lot of sense putting it over there instead of having a separate field for it.
Yep. And if the working group can come up to and agree that, okay, we can use something like opencontainers.org.artifact type or something, then it makes the whole conversation much more simpler, and it's a standardized one, and the proposal also improves in some way. So
Question,
that's,
would that be the only annotation we would surface, or we would surface all annotations and there happens to be one? Like, is it a special case annotation?
I was going to push to have it all annotations and to kind of do that propagation up from whatever your manifest is, to propagate up all the annotations on that manifest to whatever descriptor you return. And that way you can filter on more than just your one field if you need to on the client side.
So we had explored that a little bit, and there was a concern about how many annotations would come up and what is the validation of that. Like, is it just manifest annotations? Is it the blob annotations as well? So that's the circle around which annotations. Is it a special case annotation or a new property?
In general, I would advocate for fewer special cases. Annotations are just another field on a descriptor. They get handled like every other field on every other descriptor. They get moved around. Like, there's no filtering on annotations yet, so I don't think we should add that.
Yeah, I'm looking at this and assuming that this is the descriptor that is automatically generated, because I don't.
So
I'm
let me
trying
get
to see
to
the value. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Sanjay.
Let me get to the referrers API, or the actual API that returns the lists, and the reason of why this exists might become a little more clear. But yeah, I think these are just flexible points that we need to discuss as a part of the working group and agree all annotations or none, or maybe a property or whatever that is. So this is probably the most interesting part of the API, which is how do you get the list of references that are attached to an image or an artifact or whatnot. So the similar APIs have been discussed before, and I don't think the shape is any different from what we have discussed earlier, which is the API is based on the digest because the tags are mutable and whatnot. So as long as you have the digest, you kind of query by the digest. We went through a couple of different rounds of API discussion. I think this is kind of what I want to get people's attention to. The proposal, because it's a working group, we want to put it under OCI as an extension, start it out there or move it directly to distribution. That's something we can discuss. The idea is that you query for the referrers and you give it the digest of the artifact that you're querying for, and that's it. It's very similar to how tag listing API and everything else works. And you kind of like use the same pagination semantics for tag API. And the response is nothing but a set of descriptors, and each of the descriptors here have the corresponding digest of the artifact, followed by its media type and size, just for validation as a standard response. Jason, you have a question?
At the risk of bike shedding, but then that's what we're here for. What is the artifacts part in the path for? Could it just be _OCI/refers?
We can. That's just following the current OCI extension specification. So we can change it to, we can maybe work on the extension specification and talk to Vincent as well to kind of remove that as well. But this is just aligning with that as a path.
Okay.
It's not set in stone.
The extension needs to have a name in space under _OCI. And
Right,
then the
could it be
APIs
refer?
It could be referrer. Didn't we have that in another proposal? And the recursive referrers might be funny in regexes.
Yeah, that one is the least of the problems. I think it's just a matter of we were trying to.
Yeah, we could name that anything if it falls under the extension API.
Is the
Jason,
idea
you're
that this would only be an extension, or that this would be like part of, or is we just like prototyping in an extension and then we will propose it as an actual OCI API?
We could propose both ways, right? Depending on what distribution accepts. We could say that if you don't allow us to sit directly under distribution, we could start as an extension, see it getting adopted, and then move it up with 2.0 or 3.0 distribution. That's up to us to kind of make that decision. But this is just a start point of the other thing. Maybe I can give some context on why the name was kind of like discussed this way. Was OCI is the name, like the grouping of all extensions that OCI can kind of like incubate under. And this one is mostly like what we discussed as a component or a subcomponent. So different ways to kind of link different artifacts. We could say this is ref types / refers if you want to, if that's the working group that we want. So it's up to us to kind of like call it whatever the name should be. So yeah, so that might help. The last one is that we decided to move everything to arguments just to keep this path as simple as 3 parts, which is the name, the working group or the group, followed by the actual operation. And everything else kind of goes as arguments, and the digest is nothing but the argument of the manifest itself. Any questions? Because I think that kind of covers the gist of it. We can get into pagination and whatnot if people don't have. Nisha, go ahead. I think you're on top.
Yeah, thanks. I'll start from the top. You said that the blobs don't have to be ordinal. Is it possible to enforce blobs being ordinal?
That's kind of up to the artifact type, right? This is the whole idea that layers are ordinal because it makes sense for the container image format. Helm charts, they're not. Signatures may not. SBOMs may not. The whole idea is it's a collection, and it's up to the artifact type to decide what they want to be there.
Right.
Manifest
So
would never change.
So a client would look for artifact type, and depending upon artifact type, they can operate on the blobs.
Right. And the order of the blobs cannot change because the manifest would change and the digest of the manifest would change. So how the blobs are listed is indirectly bound, and how the manifest is formatted is indirectly bound. So there's not too much of an issue with the ordinality itself. Whether you use it and you mount it as a flat file system with write-out files, or whether you use it as a set of files that are individual files, is up to you. That was the reason why the whole idea was to kind of like step away from the layers, whereas layers require them to be composed in a particular way, and image spec has a notion of how the layers need to be used. But there's nothing stopping us from saying, yeah, we use the same layers. The other thing was the image spec layers and the APIs don't map, because layers is actually again /blobs, which is a different API. So yeah, there's a bunch of different history as to how you want to think about it. But Jason, you had your hand up as well.
I think Nisha had other points.
Yeah, I have a list of questions. I was noting down questions while you were going through things, but okay. Can the subject point to another artifact manifest?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
you can have like a application vendor OCI artifact manifest that has a subject which also has a vendor OCI artifact manifest. So there might be a loop over there. There's similar to the other proposals that have references.
Not as long as all the child objects of each one of those artifacts are blobs.
So, I mean, even if the digest, well, I mean, first of all, I don't even know whether that's.
Yeah, but I'm going to throw actual terms in here instead of ice cream and things like that. Let's take an image that has an SBOM that points to that image, that has a signature that points to that SBOM. You can't create a signature to the SBOM that also has a child that's the SBOM, and you can't do anything funny like that, because the child objects of the signature are only blobs, and there's no way to create a second pointer from the signature to the SBOM with the ordering.
Okay, so suppose there's a blob that points to a signature, and the subject also points to the signature. What happens then?
Subjects can't point to blobs, right? Subjects can only point to manifests.
Ah, okay. So the blobs can be descriptors, but they cannot be other manifests.
They can only be blobs, and so
okay,
manifest are a tier above blobs.
Think of a manifest. The way we've been thinking about this is just the way I've understood registries and how, as far as I know, all the registries have implemented lifecycle management. A thing users think about is represented as a manifest. Blobs are the persistence of the content of the manifest, but if I'm ever trying to interact with something as in the registry as a user, I'm interacting with the manifest that represents the context. It might be a digest, it might be a tag, but that points to the manifest. So this is kind of saying is things that are manifest, that are artifacts, point to other artifacts. We never get into the detail of pointing at blobs. It's always lifecycle objects point to lifecycle objects.
Okay. So my next question is, this looks like a V3 change, like a major version bump. Why did you choose to use V2?
Sorry, where is V2?
So in your APIs, they are V2. Should that be V3?
So this is a part of the OCI extension discussion that we had. The spec actually allows you to expose new APIs under V2 without going through a full V3 rev, primarily because authentication and all that works very similar. For example, if you can pull an image, you want to be able to use the same scope to be able to access. And the moment you kind of go to V3, you have to have different routing rules and whatnot, and that makes the registry hosting much more difficult. So that was the reasoning why it's under V2. The manifest itself is an image specification detail. It's not a detail of the registry. So the registry enables you to expose a V2 API through the extension API, but you can have manifests that are not specifically in the V1 of image spec. That's the reasoning. Does that explain why it's under V2? So if you kind of like look at this one, maybe you can follow that as a way to kind of like see the extension proposal, which enables you to add more to V2 without actually breaking clients.
Okay, so the fact that there is a new path to refer to artifacts helps to distinguish between registries that support the artifact manifest and registries that don't.
Correct. You can query that and it should give you a 404 saying that I don't support any of these new things and just go away and fail on the client if needed. And so for any backwards client that wants to kind of like use this API, they would just see a 404 because the APIs don't exist.
Okay. So next question. I didn't quite understand why the descriptor needs to also have an artifact type along with the manifest. Is that to reduce like round tripping when you're querying things?
Right. I think you kind of like hit the nail on the head. The whole idea was that if you did not filter on the server, you send back, let's say you have 100 signatures or 100 something in links to that specific image. You get back a full list of something. Just by looking at this media type, you're not going to be able to tell what it is. You have to kind of go back. So I kind of take away two proposals here, which is let's drop the artifact type and maybe use an annotation or just give all the annotations of the manifest. That's one possible option where when we put together a proposal, we can kind of like massage this and say, look at the annotations to define what the artifact is. That was the basic reason. Otherwise, you have to go back and pull everything on the image, which might be, if you're having daily scans, you're going to have 365 scans by the end of the year. Or if you're having signatures that is signing on a regular basis, you'll have more of that kind of craft coming in. So it's more like an optimization mechanism, nothing more.
It shows up more when you get to the filtering examples. Because we did a two-phase approach. Is basically you can filter on artifact type, which it's actually optional in the spec, and you can go further and filter on annotations. The idea is annotations are more complex to index all of them. So the idea is if you filter on a single artifact type property, it makes implementations easier to manage. So that's kind of why it was lifted as a first class property. If you don't surface what the artifact type is, then you have no idea whether it's 300 security scans, 500 signatures, or 10 signatures, let's just say, or hundreds of annotations that got added as well as separate artifacts for the end of life kind of conversations we've been having on that other thread.
And Steve, I know you were bringing this up earlier. You were asking if we start lifting these things up as annotations, where do we stop? And I would say stop when you hit that first manifest. Don't dig into the child of the manifest and other, blobs and things like that. Just pull up those first layer of artifacts of annotations.
Okay.
Michael Brown, you're here. We had one example where we were lifting all the annotations. I don't know if you want to bring up your thoughts on it, because we had that as one example at one point.
So we had what as an example that we were?
Remember when we were lifting all annotations up into the response of the referrers API?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things about that is that, you quickly get into the spot where you could be lifting up almost all of the data of the manifest, right? The annotations is unbounded. And I think alongside of this proposal, there was the talk that was recently merged of adding that data field. And so if you're going to lift all of the annotations, which is potentially, 3.9 megabytes of the manifest or something, why not just include the entire data field and embed the entire manifest in that response? Why lift just the annotations? Why not just bring the whole manifest into this response? I think the scaling of the API with just lifting annotations is basically the same as scaling the API if we were returning the full contents of the manifest.
I have one last question. And this one, coming from someone who is not an API expert, but there are some folks that I've spoken to who have said that having parameters in the API may not be a good idea. Just real quick, just why did you choose to use parameters rather than full paths?
I can give some history on this if folks are interested. We went through the original reference /referrers because if you implement distribution, they actually have a reverse segment lookup, which is you look at the path and then you kind of walk back. There's some really interesting implementations that you can do where you pass in the digest followed by referrer / and give me references. That is one way to do it. We went through that full cycle and then we went through the extensions proposal, which is have a standard way in which you can extend the registry and move everything to parameters. So that was the flow of thought, and a bunch of conversations on the extension PR kind of like call out why we didn't do that. I haven't seen an issue with parameters because the registry already expects things like next and there is a last tag and all that that's already there on distribution. So that's not to me a security concern yet, but if there is, maybe we should talk about it. I mean, that's just from my side that I can comment. If others have any other things to add, please do.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know more about why parameters are considered more dicey. I think they're more or less the same, like whether the values are ampersand A equals B or A/B. I don't think it really matters. Well, URL parsing is pretty standard and well understood, hopefully, at this point. Hopefully.
Okay, I'm done. I'll lower my head.
We can go back to the OData path.
No, that's not why we're here. Yeah, my question was more, and I think I brought this up in the PR as well. There's a requirement that the subject when a artifact references another thing as a subject, this spec proposal says that subject must exist. I was wondering if there was a technical reason that is the case, like, or if there is an implementation reason that you need that to be the case, or if that's more of a philosophical argument.
I think I was on the fence of that one. I'm okay relaxing the requirement because otherwise you won't be able to push the signature before you push the image and things like that. I think that's a very fair ask. And specifically for offline signing, we've been kind of thinking about that. The reason why we started with the subject should be there is just to keep it simple to start with, and then we can kind of evolve that. So as a working group, we can decide that the proposal does not have the requirement, and to support these scenarios, we remove this section or like remove that requirement all the way. The challenges it brings, however, is how long do you keep that if they never push the image? Those are things that registries might have to absorb in some way, saying that you push the signature, but you have some policy, and that can be an implementer's detail and not on the not in the specification itself. So it keeps the specification simple enough. Michael, if you can add to that maybe.
I think, yeah, I would say probably more philosophical, right? It's most of the things that we have in manifests that are descriptors are validated by registries, I think.
Like the blobs have to be there for a manifest to be accepted is the pattern.
Yeah.
And these are definitely different, but I think that was the pattern we were following.
It's recommended, but it's not required by OCI today. It's suggested, and I would say that one option for the GC, if there are users that have use cases where they're worried about that, they can just tag their artifact.
Yeah, I think Sajay, to your point about we should, well, if we don't require the subject to exist when you refer to it, we should be meaningfully vague about what that means for garbage collection, in the same way that we are meaningfully vague about garbage collection in general, because we don't, specify it at all. But I think there's use cases that are enabled by not requiring it, though I do understand that the pragmatism of keeping some flexibility to change later if you decide you need to. I kind of think that the use cases that are supported by it are outweighed, or they do the outweighing, and it's worth supporting that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think from the specification standpoint, we don't have to call out exactly what the behavior should be. But if there is a use case, maybe we should, right? So call out that to push the signature, you want to do that first before you push the image. So there has to be a way to support that. But this is, at this point, it's a very open discussion.
Yeah, my main question was there a technical reason you needed this to be the case, or like you needed to make a decision and you made a decision?
Right.
If it's the other one, then then I can debate, and if it's some technical reason, then I can't. So
no, I don't think we
found
a technical.
Yeah, it's a matter of trying to have a cohesive, consistent pattern that blobs are required. This thing points to something, it should be required. How do you have a reasonable model of what you're trying to push? And the cases that you were bringing up, which are valid, like, because we went through this quite a bit as well, as if you can push an update to a tag. So I have a V1 image and I want to push an update to the V1 tag because there's a security update. If I have to push the image that is a V1 image, a new V1 image, and I want it to be signed, well, these are separate documents. So I first push the new V1 image, and then I push the signature. If the signature is attached signature, there is a milliseconds of time in there where an alert can go off and said, hey, there's a new version of the V1 tag. Somebody can pull it and go like, whoop, there's no signature on it. That's scary and bad. There's two ways we've thought about fixing, doing that, and it's actually available in the APIs today, is you actually push the new manifest as a digest. You don't actually push the tag. So you push the new manifest as a unique digest. So it's a new artifact, it's a new image, but it has no affiliation with the tag yet. You push the signature that points to that digest, and then you push the tag update that says V1 now points this new digest. Yeah. And then the alert goes off, the tag says, yep, I got a new pointer, and guess what? The signature's already there.
Yeah, I think there's a race condition in there with the garbage collector though, right? If you push a manifest by digest and then sign it, and then the garbage collector says, I'm here to delete untagged things, and it deletes your untagged thing, then you never get to tag it.
In theory, yeah, most registries that I know have done untagged digests don't do it immediately. It's things that are over some period of time.
Sure.
So if it's a push operation, because that's what the whole concept of why it's garbage collection versus just validation,
Right.
is there's a latency in there that gives the registry time to coalesce the various push operations.
Yeah, I think there's also a use case on the other end of the life cycle where, I may not want to store the image that I was running 6 years ago, but I would want to store the people that signed it, the signature data of the people that signed that image, in case I needed to go back and do some forensics. I might not want to store that image. I'm never going to run it and it costs money to store, but I would want to say Brandon signed off on this. Let's go ask him if there was a bug in it. Sorry to throw
you pointed out the inconsistency on this, just to finish that loop and a handoff, but it was on delete. You may, I can't remember exactly how it's worded, but when you delete the V1 tag, you can decide to leave signatures around. So there is a little inconsistency that the subject must exist when you push, but you can delete and leave this the signature or SBOM around if you wanted. That was the balance to that PR.
We allow that already today in a lot of registries for deleting a image out of an index that exists and leaves you in a funny state. I was going to ask Jason on that one case there, does it make sense to tag that artifact when you delete the image?
So it may. I mean, this goes to an issue that we have sort of conceptually about what tags are for. Are tags for human semantic understanding of what this thing means? Like this is B1.2.3, or is this or are we saying the tag exists to prevent the garbage collector from deleting it? I think we use them for both. Like a lot of times our solution to a lot of these garbage collection problems is we'll just check that if you wanted it, you should have put a tag on it. But I think that
Put a ring on it. Put a tag on it.
Yeah.
There's a meme there somewhere.
There's definitely a meme there.
I would say for lifecycle management, if you scroll down, we have a blurb on that, and it just says that registries may tie the lifecycle. So registries can clean up tags signatures whose subjects are deleted, but they don't have to. So you could imagine a free registry may do something different than a private registry would do, or even within a private registry, it could be configurable. I also think if you need to keep around these references, there are possibly other ways to do this other than leaving them in your production repo.
Sure, there are also ways to store that information and never have it put in your production repo.
Exactly.
Right? I can just store signatures elsewhere, and I could store SBOMs elsewhere. And oh my God, I think I figured out why we don't need to do anything.
Yeah.
Mission accomplished, everyone. Meeting adjourned.
Well, I think I think there is a difference between references whose subject no longer exist needing to be stored and the use cases that we're talking about.
That's fair. I apologize for my flippant answer, but I think that I'll take your point.
I just want to give Josh maybe
Yeah,
a minute
can we
because he's
move
been waiting
along?
for
We
some
have
time.
yeah. Thanks, Sajay.
Hey, so I'm curious with the new manifest type. So this is supposed to live alongside image manifests, right? So will actual images, is the expectation that they would also potentially use this, or would container images proper always use the old manifest type? And then kind of a follow-up to that is there a scenario we can support where images could actually be the subject of something else? There's been an ongoing discussion, for example, in Helm, where can we make images of first class? Is there a way to figure out which images a Helm chart references? So For example, like if it spawns an Nginx and a Prometheus, could those tie back to a Helm chart? So the first question was, will this manifest apply to images also?
My take is no. Images have a good definition already. But the discussion does exist whether this is the one manifest to rule them all kind of thing. But I want to focus on the fact that we're solving a specific problem here. So changing the image manifest was not the scope of the group. So the conversation I'm leaning towards is this is about solving, being able to attach new things that are not images. And so if we're open, I think we can open the conversation, but that's what I would vote if asked, should we change the image manifest? But we can represent an image if we want to. The second question, whether images can point to other images, that would lead to the previous proposal, which is adding a reference to the image spec itself. That way you can have an image point to another image. But I don't know beyond that. And if others have opinions, please.
Or even an image to an artifact versus image to image.
If you
Asking if
construct
an image can point to its Helm chart, or if the Helm chart can point to an image.
Yeah, like so using your references, sorry, let me pull it up here. Using the refers endpoint, could I do point to the hash of a Helm chart and be like Nginx and Prometheus?
Yeah, so you're saying tag the Helm chart, make that the parent in your repo, and then all the things that the Helm chart contains point back up to the Helm chart. You're muted, Sajay.
Sorry. You could add links for the Helm chart pointing to different images. So, but that would kind of like mean that the subject is the Helm chart, right? Or the subject, no, sorry. The subject is the image. So you have the Helm chart, digest of the Helm chart. You can add different links saying that these are all the images that the Helm chart is pointing to, if you want to solve it that way. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, I guess the reason I bring up like the first question is if the subject field is not applicable to images, and you're saying that images shouldn't use this manifest, then that relationship seems to be not doable. Which is fine. I'm just trying to understand.
That's what I was trying to understand. Are you saying an image should point to its Helm chart, or a Helm chart can point to a collection of images?
Well, a Helm chart could never be this artifact, right? Because
well, we just go back to what problem you're trying to solve. Like, because there's a couple ways. Because there's another problem that Helm charts are in different repos. So you have a cross repo link. That's what PR27 was about way back when. So look, it's a mind wrap to think about it both ways. An image, if an image is pointing to its Helm chart, yes, you could actually do that conceptually. But the problem is you have lots of Helm charts that point to the same images. So no one image points to one Helm chart. You actually want the opposite. You want lots of Helm charts to point to lots of images, but the images don't necessarily ever know about their Helm charts. They're just things they get deployed, and Helm charts are actually doing a deployment.
So the challenge I'm going to throw out is this artifact type that we've discussed here could never be a Helm chart, because you would never be able to point to image manifest. You can only point to blobs.
Well, so that's where I'm kind of getting into what do we want to solve, because the challenge with the Helm chart pointing to a collection of images is a Helm chart would be, let's just say the Helm chart is in one of those repos. But if a Helm chart's deploying one image, that's not very interesting. It's when the Helm chart is deploying 2 or 3 images, and those 2 or 3 images are not in the same repo. Right? CNAP kind of went through some of this stuff. So you have the WordPress. So you have a WordPress container image, the WordPress Helm chart, the WordPress container image that actually owns the code for running WordPress. And then you have, is it 2 other containers? There's MySQL, and I thought there was something else. So there's at least 2 images now the Helm chart is pointing to. So you have 3 artifacts, the Helm chart, the WordPress container image, and then the MySQL database. Those are in at least 2 repos, if not 3. As soon as you start talking about I'm trying to point across repos, you kind of get into an interesting world of, is that the way somebody promoted it from one registry to another? So I love the idea of supporting Helm charts. I think there's a couple of other challenges there around some rename, and there's some other work I'm trying not to, get too conflated here, but
Yeah,
I don't know if you can really solve Helm chart here.
I don't mean to focus on Helm like that itself, but just like the idea of a full-blown application containing multiple images. So whatever that means. I guess while I have my mic on, but my final question was the artifact type field. Is that so? I see like it says it should be registered with IANA, but the example says signature/example. Is that actually supposed to be like a fully qualified media type again, similar to OCI artifact?
Yeah, exactly. It's just we were trying to not use one of the,
so media type
that
always exactly then to OCI artifact, and then artifact type would be Helm chart something.
I think I'll probably reiterate what I said in the first part, which is this, according to this proposal, we expected it to be the IANA type, but the other proposals keep it string form free. So as a reference type working group, we should decide how we want to go. I'm open to both ways. I don't think I have a strong opinion on either, but it gives some structure if we tell them this is how it should be. Instead of free form annotation, then might as well move to an annotation. So we have a different set of options there that we can choose.
The problem, this actually came back from when the OCI artifact stuff was all about, is like, how do you get a unique identity? Who owns signature? So by deferring it, instead of OCI becoming the gatekeeper of who owns the .word file extension, for instance, that somebody else can squat on, it was, let's defer to IANA. There's a place there that you can register. If you really want to own that type, then that's where you register it. And then OCI doesn't have to be in any kind of legal quandaries of who owns a particular name. So that's all that was doing. It was just leveraging that existing work that we did under the OCI artifacts and the media types. If you want to stick that in an annotation, you still have the same problem of who owns that string. So by deferring to IANA, we no longer have to worry about that.
Brandon?
Yeah, so Josh, if you're out of questions there, my one question was going to be the created annotation that we had just added in there. I'm assuming that was because we don't have the config blob anymore. And so we needed to put the created because that was a valuable piece of data that came out of the config. Do we have, first, is that true? And second, is there other valuable data that we might want to pull out of the config object as annotations?
So the created data, and this is a perfect example of by actually implementing the specs and getting use cases and validating those over time. This is how some of these things surfaced up. So the created was, if you have a bunch of scan results, and there might be 100 of them, or every couple of days you add another scan, how do you get the latest version? And by the way, you're probably promoting these across registries. So when it gets pushed to a registry, you can't use the registry date because the registry doesn't know if it was the first time it was pushed or not. And you don't want to put limitations on the order of which things get pushed between registries. So the whole idea is the artifact owner creates it, they set that date, and it's acknowledged through the life of that thing moving around. I forgot it was actually in the config, but yes, it serves the same, I guess it would serve the same purpose.
Yeah, and so I'll push up there of saying we might want to look back to that config and see if there are any other fields in there that we think will be valuable. And if so, just make annotations for them to get a whole set together all in one PR.
That's right.
Was that it, Brandon?
I'm looking back to my list. I think that was it because everybody else just keep repeating the same questions that I'd already had earlier. So good crowd.
I want to surface something Nisha's saying in the chat, which is this is why she asked if the blobs could be ordinal. The latest one is the first one or the last one. Is that
blobs? I think we're conflating blobs with artifacts. So each scan is its own artifact. You don't have multiple scans in one manifest. Because the whole idea is on Monday, I do a scan, I push that. On Wednesday, I do a scan, I push that. Thursday, blah, 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 blah. And there's never any aggregation of all those from a document. They're all individual artifacts. As somebody promotes it from registry 1 to registry 2, they can choose to keep the first for the original and maybe the last 2, and they can drop everything in the middle. And you can easily promote that, and there's all signatures. Basically, none of the manifests change. I just chose not to bring some of them across the promotion process.
That was something that was very different in Nisha's proposal versus all the rest of ours, which was that I think her proposal was looking at taking, if you want to update and add a new scan result or something like that, her proposal was to modify that existing manifest and add more blobs to that list. And I don't think anybody else has that in theirs. And I think there's a value to having that artifact we push up being immutable. Once you push it up, you're not changing it, you're not modifying it. There are risks when you get into that pattern.
It's one of the things that makes registry scale so well, right? You can globally distribute the thing with multiple replicas. You get eventual consistency because the only thing that ever gets updated is a tag. And if people follow a best practice that tags are unique, then you literally have something you can push in multiple regions. They all merge together. You never have any conflict across a manifest that might get updated in different regions. Like keep all the documents separate, and the index that gets managed for the referrals API is an in-memory thing. As artifacts are pushed that have a subject property, the registry sees that subject property, goes, oh, you're pointing at that other thing. Let me keep that. The registry manufactures an index, not an OCI index, just a collection of information. And then when you ask the referrals API, it says, hey, what do I currently have? And there's never any user documents that change.
So I'm going to push us forward here, looking at the time and seeing we only have a couple minutes left. Any last thoughts on this one? Or otherwise, I don't see any other hands. So I was going to say.
I wanted to do one thing is just to put a cap on it. There was updates for the proposal in the notes. Can everybody take a look at that? Make sure that we're okay. It was, can we move artifact type to annotations? Can we remove the requirement for subject digest to exist from Jason and then add more annotations to the config example from Brandon? Are they the only 3 amendments that we want to make to the proposal? Okay, if there are any more, please update them. Otherwise, Brandon, you can have 3 minutes if you'd like to go for your next item.
So mine, I don't have any screen share or anything like that, but I was going to suggest maybe making a proposal E, which was kind of taking a combination of what we've done with A, B, and D today. To basically create a new media type, probably with those suggestions you were just talking about, Lockie. Kind of changing a few little details there, but probably have a new media type, add a reference API to query some of this stuff. And then also adding the refers kind of data in there. And I've got all this kind of jotted down. I'll throw it in notes if people are worried that you'll miss some details here. But basically taking all the best of each of those things, having tags in there that you can look up later on, and giving people a way that they can call this stuff. And it's, I like the idea of Frankenstein proposal. My idea is basically giving people that progression so that they can start today with something that exists right now and push up an OCI artifact as it exists today with that tag digest, and then know that they've got that promotion option later on to have that API, they can query it, and then know that the next day they can go forward and start pushing this new media type if they know all their registries support that new media type, and not have that config blob sitting around later on. And so giving people that ability to use this today without waiting, but then know that they've got that future path, kind of putting them all together into one proposal. Thoughts on that? Concerns? No, I can go write it up at some point, and then
I think that's a good approach, Brandon. I'd be +1 for that if you'd like to take the pen and then present it, and then we can all talk over it, because it's kind of looking like forwards compatibility and backwards from both angles of the same set of proposals. And if you're willing to take the pen, it looks like everybody's +12, +1 on 23. And I'm going to call it the Avengers proposal. It's the proposal is greater than the sum of the parts, right? So each proposal has strengths, but all of them together will yield the greatest result, rather than Frankenstein. Does that sound okay? So if you want to take the pen to that,
yeah.
Anything else before we finish up? Otherwise, thanks, Sajay and Steve, and appreciate the engagement and all the proposals so far. I think it's been great to talk through all these things.
Yep, that's all I got.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, folks. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.